Hibatullah, Tilawat.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
That's
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله فالق الحب والنوى يخرج الحي من الميت ومخرج الميت من الحي ذلكم الله فأنى تؤفكون. فالق الإصباح وجعل الليل سكنا والشمس والقمر حسبانا ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. وهو الذي جعل لكم النجوم لتهتدوا بها في ظلمات البر والبحر قد فصلنا الآيات لقوم يعلمون. وهو الذي أنشأكم من نفس واحدة فمستقر ومستودع قد فصلنا الآيات لقوم يفقهون. جزاك الله.
जी वजाहत अहमद.
Assalamu alaikum, Huzoor. I will now present the English translation of chapter 6, verses 96 to 99. I seek refuge with Allah from Satan the accursed. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. Verily, it is Allah who causes the grain and the date stones to sprout. He brings forth the living from the dead, and He is the bringer forth of the dead from the living. That is Allah. Wherefore then are you turned back? He causes the break of day, and He made the night for rest, and the sun and the moon for reckoning time. That is the decree of the mighty, the wise. And He it is who has made the stars for you, that you may follow the right direction with their help, amid the deep darkness of the land and the sea. We have explained the signs in detail for a people who possess knowledge. And He it is who has produced you from a single person, and there is for you a home and a lodging. we have explained the signs in detail for a people who understand.
अच्छा रिसर्च प्रेजेंटेशन जो है नुमान हसन एमडी स्टूडेंट
Assalamu alaikum, Huzoor.
वालेकुम सलाम
Huzoor, I've just finished my master's in the Department of Physiology, and this is my first year in medicine. And today I'll be just presenting a project that I was doing during my master's on cystic fibrosis. Just as a background, Huzoor, cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease in which you have a mutated CFTR gene, which is found in 1 in every 20 white people, and more than 4,100 Canadians are affected by this disease. Average age of survival for this with cystic fibrosis is 50 years in Canada, which is the highest you'll find when compared to the rest of the world. For instance, our friends just south in the US, the average age of survival for cystic fibrosis is 40 years. So for someone who has a mutated CFTR, basically it affects the transport system in your epithelial cells, which are your internal linings of organs. So that affects the intestines. They tend to have pancreatic disease, lung disease, and, for example, your genital disease. So far, medications have been able to treat the symptoms, but the consistent and ongoing lung infection eventually leads to death. So in a healthy lung, a pathogen, which could be bacteria or virus, comes into our lung, which is trapped in that mucus layer, which is represented by the blue area on the screen, as everyone can see, and the ciliary projections that are coming off the epithelial cells. They move that liquid towards our mouth and out as sputum. But in a CF lung, you have an abnormal mucus layer. So that is the air surface liquid layer, that blue layer that you're seeing. So in that case, the pathogen comes in, it gets trapped, the ciliary projections are not able to eradicate the bacteria, which leads to progression of bacteria and production of biofilm, which leads to loss of lung function. So Huzoor, the problem with this is not everyone is able to study this layer because it's on a very micro scale. So the focus of our research at the University of Saskatchewan was to develop a synchrotron-based technique to study this layer and to see how it changes in response to bacteria. So synchrotron is basically, Huzoor, it's electrons running in a beam line, and they're diffracted through magnets, and when they're diffracted, they give off very specific light, which is wavelengths that goes through the animal, and which we're able to see very molecular or micro level images. So in the next picture, Huzoor, what you're seeing is the source, the waves coming off of those magnets, they're going through the animal, and the trachea is highlighted by the gray into the detector. And what we see, as we're on the right side, is a picture that shows us the difference between the tissue, which is at the bottom, and air in the top part. So we're able to distinguish between tissue and air, but we were still not able to distinguish between the liquid layer and the tissue. So a way to overcome that was to introduce agarose beads. So these beads, when introduced into the trachea, they go and sit on the tissue. So the bottom part of that trachea, of that round bead, is sitting on the tissue, and then the diffraction that we see through synchrotron is where the liquid layer is. So by this, we were able to achieve a method of measuring how much ASL layer someone has or an animal has, and how it changes when we introduce bacteria into it. So in the past couple of years, we have established that in a wild type, in a healthy animal, you have basal secretion, which is represented by the A, And then when we introduce bacteria, you have a significant increase in that in that ASL secretion layer, which helps to eradicate the bacteria. But when we look at a CF animal, you have reduced basal secretion, and you have no response to when a bacteria is introduced into the trachea. So Huzoor, in terms of our knowledge, we are the first group so far to use synchrotron technology to be able to study this layer, and further studies are in progress where we're looking at how to increase that, because recent data has suggested that this ASL layer is part of the antimicrobial properties to kill off that bacteria and eradicate it.
अच्छा, that's all.
जी हुजूर।
चलो सवाल करो उससे।
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question that have you done any human trials, or how soon are you or anyone is supposed to be doing them?
So far, Huzoor, this has only been done in animals.
पर ये किसने बता दिया है ये किस जो 1 to 20 जो Caucasians में आते हैं
जी जी
ये फिगर कहाँ से लिए हैं
वो mutated genes की है, one in every जी
वो they are more prone to this disease
जी जी
हैं
जी
अच्छा फिर
तो
इलाज तो उनका करना है
जी Huzoor,
कर रहे हैं एनिमल्स का
absolutely, Huzoor. The point is to learn from animal studies, understand the physiology, so that the pharmaceutical companies can be benefit of that and make drugs for that.
As pharmaceutical companies are able to make money. अच्छा तो अभी तक पहुंचा कि रिजल्ट क्या आया फिर
Huzoor, we are working on a hypersaline solution clinical trials.
कोई ऐसा promising बात तो कोई नहीं की रिजल्ट आया हो आया कुछ समझ आई किसी को हैं आपको पता लगे क्या निकाला
Huzoor, we're trying to understand the physiology.
अच्छा अच्छा still trying to understand the physiology
जी Huzoor.
in this advanced age
It's a humble effort.
अच्छा ठीक एनिमल्स तक हैं ये आगे नहीं आगे
Inshallah, Huzoor, please pray for us so we can do the clinical trials.
अच्छा तो मास्टर्स डिग्री कर लिया अब एमडी स्टार्ट करी है
जी Huzoor.
5 साल 6 साल
4 साल के Huzoor.
अच्छा मास्टर के बाद 4 साल का है वैसे 4 साल है
वैसे 4 साल का Huzoor.
चलो नेक्स्ट आने दो फिर सवाल किसी ने नहीं करना लगता जी हाँ यस
Assalamu alaikum.
No, Islam.
My question is, why are you using a synchrotron instead of an MRI or a CT scan?
As I mentioned, Huzoor, this is a very micro layer, so it's not usually seen or differentiated through X-rays and CT. So synchrotron allows us to look at very micro level, and that is the benefit of doing this. And it's built in University of Saskatchewan.
ठीक ये नैनो टेक्नोलॉजी भी इस्तेमाल हो सकती है इसमें
जी Huzoor, यूज़ होती है वहाँ पे काफ़ी physicists काम करते हैं. We just work in very minute small subpart that is called the biomedical imaging part.
इसको नहीं इसको स्कैन करने के लिए
Huzoor, haven't looked into that.
अच्छा
Assalamu alaikum, Pyare Huzoor. So as you mentioned, cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease usually found in Caucasian population. Is there any other way that this disease can be passed on other than genes? And if so, are there any precautions that can be taken?
Huzoor, this is a genetic disease. The only way it could be passed on is through exchange of genetic material. As far as prevention, I don't think there is any prevention apart from early screening.
सिस्टिक फाइब्रोसिस बच्चे एशियन औरतों में यूट्रस में सिस्टिक फाइब्रोसिस बड़ा होता है एशियंस औरतों में ज़्यादा नहीं है रेशो?
वहाँ पे हजूर कॉकेशियंस में सबसे ज़्यादा है, उसके बाद एशियंस हैं।
यूट्रस में जो औरतों में है
जी जी,
वो भी कॉकेशियंस में ज़्यादा है?
जहाँ तक मेरे इल्म में है
अच्छा।
हजूर जी।
अच्छा, ठीक। और चलो फिर बैठ जाओ।
हजूर
नेक्स्ट मुशर्रफ नवीद खान, ये तो पोस्ट डॉक्टर रिसर्च है। वालेकुम सलाम, क्या कर रहे हैं?
जी हुजूर, मैंने पीएचडी की थी ऑर्गेनिक केमिस्ट्री में यूके से, और अभी यहाँ पे पोस्ट डॉक्टर फेलो के तौर पे।
अच्छा, माशाल्लाह। अच्छा, चलें फिर।
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi huzoor. My name is Musharraf Naveed Khan, and I'm working as a postdoctoral research fellow in University of Saskatchewan. My research area is basically organic synthesis, and I'm working on the synthesis of heterocyclic compounds that have got biological importance. Basically, organic compounds have got two types of structures. Some are linear and some are cyclic. I have shown here one example of hexane. It has got linear structure, but with the same molecular formula, there is another compound called as cyclohexane. Because it has got cyclic structure, so basically the both are different compounds due to the difference in structure. But mostly organic compounds are heterocyclic because they have got at least one element other than the carbon in the ring. These are biologically important compounds, and some common examples include sugar and caffeine. And basically, this caffeine, which is extracted from coffee beans, is responsible for improving heart and brain functions. Some other examples include DNA bases and heme, which is present in hemoglobin in our blood, and chlorophyll that gives green color to the leaves. These also are examples of heterocyclic compounds. Most of the heterocyclic compounds are medicinally important. I'm showing here some famous examples. Penicillin, which was discovered in early 20th century, belongs to the class of heterocyclic compounds. Quinine was first discovered from cinchona tree and was used to treat malaria. We are aware of the neem tree, which is mostly found in Indian subcontinent. It is used to cure different diseases because it produces several heterocyclic compounds. And on the right bottom is artemisinin. It was discovered first in China by a Chinese scientist, but two American scientists discovered its biological applications, and those three scientists got Nobel Prize for Medicine for the discovery and biological applications of this compound. So what I have been doing here, basically I'm working on the synthesis of heterocyclic compounds, developing new methods for the synthesis of new compounds or optimizing the existing methods. So I will talk about few compounds I have recently worked on. Those include pyridines and glucosinolates and phytoalexins. First one is pyridine. It's a heterocyclic compound with 6-membered ring. It is highly important in medicinal and agrochemical industry. More than 7,000 drugs belong to this class of pyridines. And one example is niacin, which is basic component of vitamin B. Isoniazid is an anti-TB drug. But there are some bad pyridines as well, just like nicotine is also a pyridine, and epibetidine is a highly toxic pyridine. It was first discovered from this South American frog. My task was to develop a new synthetic method for the synthesis of pyridines. So it was started with the synthesis of beta-lactam, and after 7 steps, I was successful in obtaining the final product. And then following the same method, I made 7 more examples of the final product pyridine, and this work got published in a good American journal. Following the same method, we were successful in making another medicinally important compound, oxadiazole, which is on the bottom row, and that work also got published in a good journal. Next compound I will talk about is glucosinolates. These are naturally occurring compounds found in mostly those vegetables we eat in our daily life, and these compounds have shown antifungal and anti-cancer properties, but we lose most of these natural medicines in cooking. 36% is lost in cooking and more if we microwave the vegetable. So minimal loss is just in steam, either steam or just eating the raw vegetable. So my goal was to develop the synthetic method for this 4-hydroxygluconastatine. It was first reported 2 years ago by a Danish biologist. He discovered it from watercress plant, but nobody has synthesized it before in lab. So it was my task to develop this synthesis. It was done in 10 steps, starting with carboxylic acid and then getting the final product. I'm showing here how does it work in the lab. First picture is of chemical reaction, adding the reaction to the flask and running it for a certain period of time. Then purification of the compound, because there are always some side products in the reaction. And then the evaporation of the solvents give the final product. The last compound is phytoalexins. These are compounds produced by the immune system of the plants as a reaction of after a pathogenic attack, and these are only produced after infection. Healthy plants don't produce it. Two of these compounds I have worked on is Rutalexin. It is produced by rutabaga. It's a big turnip. We find it in supermarkets as well. And another one is brasinin. It is produced by mustard, basically. So I have been working on the synthesis of these plants, and in next few months, my colleagues actually, they are biologists, they will work on the biological applications of these plants I have synthesized. Jazakallah.
जज़ाकल्लाह हो गया चलो पूछो फिर से क्या फरमाते हैं ये तो एग्रोकेमिकल जो एग्री पे इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं केमिकल उनको स्प्रे करते हैं या क्या करते हैं
जी ज़रूर जब ये ड्रग एग्रोकेमिकल के तौर पे आ जाती है लेकिन लैब में टेस्ट करने के लिए वो माइक्रो प्लेट्स होती हैं उसमें कंपाउंड को डिज़ोल्व करके माइक्रो लेवल पे फिर जिस फंगस स्पीशी के अगेंस्ट चेक करना हो उसको ऐड किया जाता है
अच्छा ठीक अच्छा हाँ जी
Assalamu alaikum, मेरा नाम एहसान अमजद है. My question is, do these chemicals have attributes as agricultural products such as fertilizers or antipesticides?
Yes, actually research is meant for that, but it takes a long time to come to the market as a agrochemical. So we are just doing it at a minor level, and if it is found antifungal against several species of fungus or some other insect, then it comes to the market as an agrochemical, but it takes a long time and many tests.
वही सवाल मैंने किया था मैंने उर्दू में किया था आपने इंग्लिश में कर दिया कुछ नहीं हो रहा इनकी रिसर्चें होती हैं बस हैं
जी बेसिकली फॉर द सेक ऑफ रिसर्च
फिर ये उसका फ़ायदा क्या होगा
जी हुजूर हमें पब्लिकेशन मिल जाती है और
ना बट पब्लिकेशन मिल जाए अपना फ़ायदा देखना है दुनिया को क्या फ़ायदा होगा इसका रिसर्च का
जी हुजूर कल को अगर इनमें से कोई कंपाउंड बहुत ज़्यादा एप्लीकेशन शो करता है डिफरेंट इंसेक्ट्स या फंगस के अगेंस्ट तो वो एज एन एग्रीकेमिकल मार्केट में आ सकता है और क्रॉप्स की प्रोडक्शन इंक्रीज करने में हेल्प कर सकता है
अच्छा इसको एंटी फंगल बनाएंगे एंटी बैक्टीरियल बनाएंगे क्रॉप्स के लिए
जी हुजूर बेसिकली हमारे ग्रुप में रिसर्च जो है वो ये इस प्रोविंस में ज़्यादातर रिसर्च एग्रीकल्चर से रिलेटेड होती है तो हम सिर्फ फंगस के अगेंस्ट इनकी एप्लीकेशन चेक करते हैं
अच्छा यहाँ तो बड़ा ड्राई नहीं होता फसलों का सीज़न उसमें फंगस आ जाती है
जी हुजूर यहाँ पे कैनोला या मस्टर्ड वगैरह की काफ़ी ज़्यादा प्रोडक्शन है तो
हाँ तो मौसम इतना है ऐसा है कि जहाँ फंगस के लिए
जी फंगस ग्रो करने के लिए
अच्छा अच्छा है हाँ हाँ ठीक बैठ जाओ और हाँ
Assalamualaikum. You mentioned about heterocycles that have different unique set of compounds. So are you studying any unique set of compounds that may have a cure for a certain disease?
Actually, our research is to investigate the applications against fungus, not against human diseases. And basically, my job is to just do synthesis.
Against कौन सी disease? Against what disease? किसके खिलाफ क्या कहते हैं
उन्होंने सिर्फ डिजीज का कोई
Again? अगेंस्ट डिजीज?
जी
अच्छा,
disease,
मतलब स्पेसिफिक नहीं हुई। अच्छा
नहीं
अच्छा। सो रिसर्च इस ज़्यादातर है फोकस्ड ऑन एग्रोकेमिकल्स, हैं? एंड ठीक है, तो और आगे मैं मास्टर्स किस में है डिग्री?
ये जो केमिस्ट्री में,
कहाँ से?
ऑर्गेनिक केमिस्ट्री में बेसिकली।
कहाँ से? पाकिस्तान से?
जी जो एक मास्टर्स पाकिस्तान से किया था पंजाब यूनिवर्सिटी से, लेकिन बाद में दूसरा मास्टर्स जर्मनी से किया था।
फिर तीसरा मास्टर यहाँ से करना?
यहाँ पे
पीएचडी कहाँ से की है?
यूके से हुजूर।
यूके से पीएचडी की?
जी।
और यहाँ पोस्ट ग्रेजुएट?
यहाँ पोस्ट डॉक, एक पोस्ट डॉक यूके से भी की थी।
अच्छा, बहुत फिर डिग्रियाँ तो बड़ी हो गई आपके पास। जॉब कहाँ कर रहे हैं?
जी हजूर वो बस पोस्ट डॉक कर रहा हूँ, एक और पोस्ट डॉक के लिए बात चल रही है। दुआ की दरख्वास्त है।
अच्छा,
तो जॉब नहीं मिलती क्योंकि अभी तक पाकिस्तानी नेशनैलिटी है, तो काफ़ी मसला होता है।
अभी तक पाकिस्तानी नेशनलिटी है?
जी।
तो अब यहाँ आपका स्टेटस कोई नहीं है?
जी नहीं हजूर, कहीं पे एक जगह में इतना रहा ही नहीं कि स्टेटस ले सकूँ।
अच्छा, तो अब यहाँ रहना क्या रहता है?
जी हजूर जॉब आगे ढूंढ रहा हूँ, लेकिन यूएस में एक जगह पोस्ट डॉक के लिए बात
लेकिन
चल
इस
रही है।
सस्कैचुअन यूनिवर्सिटी जो है इसकी तो रैंकिंग कोई ऐसी आला नहीं है मुल्क में भी। सुना 10 के बाद है।
टॉप आई थिंक 14वें 15वें नंबर
हाँ?
पे जी 14वें 15वें नंबर
और
पे है।
हमने जो क्राइटेरिया बनाया हुआ है मेडल देने का, वो तो पहली टॉप 10 यूनिवर्सिटीज़ का होता है। तो ये तो फिर निकल गए, इसमें से कोई भी नहीं ले सकता। यहाँ बदलना पड़ेगा, है ना? हर स्टेट के लिए बनाना पड़ेगा। हर स्टेट की पहली 2 या पहली 1, यहाँ स्कूल की 2 यूनिवर्सिटीज़ हैं इसमें, हैं? रिजाइना में एक यहाँ है। चलो बैठ जाएं, कोई नहीं सवाल करना किसी ने। और तीसरा साहब कौन है? तौसीफ अहमद खान, पोस्ट डॉक्टर फेलोशिप आपको मिल गई। अच्छा, आपकी कौन सी पोस्ट डॉक कौन सी है? तीसरी, चौथी, पांचवी?
हुजूर दूसरी पोस्ट डॉक है, मगर हनी में पहली है जी।
अच्छा माशाल्लाह। चलो फिर हनी बताओ क्या कहता है।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। My research is on honey, and Khaksar is doing a postdoc in the University of Toronto. And Huzoor, just a few days ago, you sent Huzoor. I received a letter from Huzoor Yaktas in which Huzoor said that I should tell Ahmadis to go into the field of honey research. So I will just present a few of some of my research and findings in this presentation. So Allah Ta'ala in the Holy Qur'an has described the bee and honey in Surah Al-Nahl, which is chapter 16. And I'll just read out the translation. And thy Lord has inspired the bee, saying, make thy houses in the hills and the trees and the trellises which they build. Then eat of every kind of fruit and follow the ways of thy Lord that have been made easy for thee. There comes forth from their bellies a drink of varying hues. Therein is a cure for men. Surely in that is a sign for a people who reflect. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ has also stressed and said, make use of 2 cures, honey and the Quran. And Huzoor Yaktas has also in the Friday sermon in 2008 describing the honeybee said, Ahmadis should go into research because the system of revelation is linked with the honeybee. Therefore, Allah will help those researchers who are especially linked with the oneness of God and revelation. So my research is to look at honey and compare it with sugar to find out if honey is any better than sugar. At the moment, if you ask any doctor or expert and say, is honey better than sugar, they'll just say honey is just another sugar. And in the recent publication by WHO, they recommended that that people should reduce their intake of sugar, but they also included honey in that. So they said they should also reduce their honey intake. So let's see if we look at this slide there. On the left, it's sugar made of 2 molecules, which is fructose and glucose, and honey, it's also made of 80% of honey is sugar. made of fructose, glucose, and other sugars, 17% is water. And there are 3% which is made up of many compounds, some of which come from the bees and some of which come from the nectar of the flowers. And in that 3%, actually more than 600 compounds have been discovered up till now. And it is likely that the beneficial effects of honey come from that portion of the honey. And the Promised Messiah ﷺ has also given us some guidance that these are actually different, the sugar and honey. And the Prophet ﷺ once said, I was thinking about this today, and it came to my mind that the sugar, etc., that is sold in the shops is made by immoral and sinful people. If there is harm in it, then it is not surprising. But honey is made by the revelation of God, and therefore it should not be like other sugary things at all. If it or honey were like these, then all sugary things would have been called cure for mankind. But this phrase has only been reserved for honey. Thus, this property of honey is the proof of its benefit, and because it is prepared according to the revelation, the bee must only take beneficial substances when it sucks the nectar from flowers. So, Huzoor, how can we test honey versus sugar? What we can do is take some patients or healthy subjects, divide them into two groups using randomization or coin flip, and to half of them we give honey, and to half of them we give sugar. And then we ask them to keep eating it, and then test them for different various factors in the blood and disease outcomes over time. So I actually looked at the studies that were done in which honey and sugar was compared. I only found 10 studies in the whole world, very small studies, and the total population was 444 subjects. And the studies are very short. Some were 2 weeks long and some were 12 weeks long. And the honey dose that they gave in these studies was around 70 grams, which is equal to around 10 teaspoons a day. And actually, there's a very important guidance given by Holy Qur'an, which says that it is a drink of varying hues. Therein is a cure for men, which means that the honey color is very important. And the color comes from the flower. And these studies actually looked, only 3 of these 10 studies looked at the specific color of honey or the specific type of honey. So 2 studies were done in clover, 1 study was done in acacia honey, and 7 studies actually were undefined. They didn't say which honey they used. So if you look at LDL cholesterol, which is the bad cholesterol, and these are all the studies where they compared honey and sugar. If you see to the diamond, which is the final summary result, it going to the left. So it means that honey improves LDL cholesterol or reduces it compared to sugar. And this is a graph which shows the length of the study and the LDL reduction, the cholesterol reduction. And the longer the study, the longer you eat honey, the more the benefit. And this is looking at different types of honey. And if we see that if it is polyfloral, means it's multifloral, which is also undefined, you don't know which flowers it is, compared to that, acacia has a better effect, and clover honey appears to have the largest effect. And in my research, I also looked at a few other biomarkers. HDL cholesterol, good cholesterol, improves, which is a good thing. Triglyceride is a bad cholesterol, it reduces, which is a good thing. Weight actually reduces compared to sugar. So if somebody is having sugar in their tea, you change it to honey, it is possible that you might lose weight. And glucose improves, which is also a good thing. There was no effect on blood pressure. And all this research was actually done by an Ahmadi volunteer student in the lab. So Huzoor, the conclusion was the honey is associated with reduced cardiometabolic risk factors or heart disease risk factors compared to sugar. And our confidence in the results is very low because the studies are very small, very short duration, and larger studies are needed. Huzoor Hazrat Khalifatul-Masih Rabe Rahimahullah said that you Ahmadis should undertake research on honey because it is one of our religious duties. So for that purpose, I actually looked at I'm looking at some other projects, and I'll just list them. Huzoor, I'm looking at beekeepers' health. If beekeepers have a better health than normal people because they handle honey and they eat a lot of honey, then is honey beneficial for gut bacteria? Because we know that some sugars are, but we don't know if honey is good for gut bacteria, and it's a very hot topic. Then also, if honey is beneficial for childhood diarrhea, we know that honey is an antibacterial. And if given to a child, will it actually reduce childhood diarrhea? So these are 3 other projects I'm working on. And Huzoor, the issues at the moment are that scientists are not following from the guidance from the Holy Qur'an, which says they're different colors. And most of the studies, the scientists have not written which honey they used. They just picked a supermarket honey and used it. Huzoor, more Ahmadis need to go into honey research. But Huzoor, the issue is that there is very little funding, or almost no funding available. I applied for 2 grants. I only got 1 grant of $4,000, which actually does not cover anything except for travel expenses. Jazakallah, Huzoor.
Travel expenses to honey farm? Honey bee farm?
जी हुजूर, one of the honey packing companies gave funding.
अच्छा, ये किसी ने एक विधि किया आया हुआ था, मैंने देखा तो पढ़ा था कि एक आदमी को कैंसर था, उसने शुगर बिल्कुल ख़त्म कर दी, अपने हर चीज़ से निकाल दी, और वो पिछले 10 साल से सर्वाइव कर रहा है, कैंसर सबसाइड कर गया। अब ये नहीं पता उन्होंने हनी इस्तेमाल किया कि नहीं, लेकिन शुगर से उसने कंट्रोल कर लिया अपना कैंसर।
जी हुजूर, हनी शुगर का तो पता है कि वो ज़्यादा खाने से नुकसान होता है हुजूर। हनी का भी नहीं पता कि उस थोड़ा सा
मनुका हनी का बड़ा मशहूर है, उसका नहीं रिसर्च आई
हुजूर। मनुका हनी,
एकेशिया और देन सेकंड वाज क्लोवर
जी।
अच्छा, और 2 आए तो मनुका बड़ी मशहूर है
जी हुजूर।
वहाँ न्यूजीलैंड से पता करना पड़ेगा इसके लिए। मनुका न्यूजीलैंड में होता है
जी हुजूर,
वहाँ से पता करना पड़ेगा उसके क्या, वो बड़ा क्लेम करते हैं उसके ये क्वालिटीज़ हैं
हुजूर। मनुका पे जितनी रिसर्च जी हुजूर, मनुका पे जितनी रिसर्च हुई है वो उन्होंने एंटी बैक्टीरियल इफेक्ट को देखा है। ये जो हार्ट डिजीज़ के जो फैक्टर्स हैं, कोलेस्ट्रॉल को उन्होंने नहीं देखा अभी तक।
दूसरे रिसर्च यानी की हो रही है डेनमार्क में, वहाँ से पता किया ये प्रोपोलस और ये जो है 30 चीज़ें, ये तो शुरू वहीं से हुई थी पहले डेनमार्क से।
जी जी हुजूर, प्रोपोलस पे यूरोप में काफ़ी रिसर्च हो रही है।
अब वो ये पहले शुरू डेनमार्क से हुआ था, वहाँ से पता भी करना चाहिए ना।
जी हुजूर।
किस किस टाइप के उसके ऊपर किया उन्होंने।
जी हुजूर।
ख़ास किस्म का प्रोपोलस है या हर किस्म का प्रोपोलस है?
जी हुजूर। हुजूर, प्रोपोलस मुख्तलिफ हैं, अभी ब्राज़ीलियन प्रोपोलस भी काफ़ी मशहूर हो गया है, उन्होंने भी काफ़ी रिसर्च शुरू की है।
अच्छा, हमारे एक हैं कज़क साहब, यहीं आजकल के टोरंटो में आ गए हैं, शायद अमेरिका में थे, जिनका बेटा रिसर्च कर रहा है। उनको जॉर्डन से आए हैं या
जी जी,
सीरिया?
मोहम्मद अल बुराकी हैं जी।
हाँ बुराकी,
जी
हाँ।
जी।
वो भी उनको भी शामिल कर लेना थी रिसर्च में।
जी मैं उनसे
उनका वहाँ हनी बी फार्म था बहुत बड़ा।
जी हुजूर, मैं कांटेक्ट में हूँ उनके। वो असल में
उनका बेटा लॉस एंजलिस में कर रहा है रिसर्च।
जी जी हुजूर।
वो भी इसी पे कर रहा है शायद।
हुजूर, वो हनी बीज पे कर रहा है। वो देखता है कि वो बीज कम हो रही हैं तो उसका क्या, क्यों हो रही हैं।
हाँ
तो हुजूर, मेरी रिसर्च हनी पे है, वो बीज पे नहीं।
बीज भी तो कम हो रही है कि तो जो इंसेक्टिसाइड इस्तेमाल हो रहा है ना क्रॉप पे, उसकी बड़ी वजह है।
जी इंसेक्टिसाइड भी है हुजूर, और वो माइट जो आया है वरवा माइट,
हाँ वो भी खा लेता है। और सवाल करो उनसे।
Assalamualaikum, Huzoor. My question is, do insecticides has it been proven that they have any kind of effect on the honey, or is that filtered out when the bees actually create the honey itself?
The studies, the honeybees are actually very, very good at taking out any impurities from the environment. So studies haven't shown that any insecticide residue remains.
Residual effect कोई नहीं उसका।
No, हुजूर, अभी तक studies.
Insecticides अच्छा कहीं भी इस्तेमाल हुआ है?
जी हनी पे उसको साबित नहीं होता। हनी बी इज़ वेरी गुड एट रिमूविंग दोस।
वो हो नहीं सकता है जो जिस पे इंसेक्टिसाइड स्प्रे किया हुआ है जिन क्रॉप पे या फ्लावर्स पे, उस पे जो हनी ने जाके नेक्टर लेना तो खुद ही मर जाना, हनी बनना ही नहीं उससे। क्योंकि अक्सर जो इंसेक्टिसाइड हैं सिस्टेमिक इस्तेमाल होते हैं अब, तो वो साथ ही ट्रैवल कर जाते हैं सिस्टम में तो ख़त्म हो जाता है।
अच्छा,
इसलिए तो मक्खियाँ मर रही हैं। तकरीबन 30% जो इनके फार्म है वो तबाह हो गए हैं इंसेक्टिसाइड से ज़्यादा मेजर कॉज का इंसेक्टिसाइड्स ही हैं। हाँ, इनको भी पेन देने हैं, दे दो, आ जाओ पेन ले लो, इधर से आ जाओ।